The criminalisation of buying sex is back on the agenda at the Scottish Parliament. This is something that's floated around for years, it's been debated, but no one's brought a bill forward actually proposing it in a concrete sense. But now Ash Regan, the ALBA, formerly SNP, MSP, has brought forward such a bill. So this bill would make it illegal to pay for sex. By sex, they mean some sort of physical contact. It wouldn't include shows or pornography or whatever. So this bill is now proposed in the Scottish Parliament. Will it pass? I really don't know. I find it very difficult to tell. Why hasn't it happened previously, despite the fact that when it's been debated, most of the people speaking in debates seem to be in favour of this measure? Well, one reason would be during the SNP Green coalition, it wasn't going to happen through the government, because the Scottish Greens policy is to decriminalise prostitution completely, and that's also the policy of the Liberal Democrats as well. So it's their policy, you assume that attitude would dominate in a big part of the SNP, big part of the Labour Party as well. I think of the Conservatives, a lot of them are libertarians, so they would say, just let people do what they like, take their own risks, let the market deal with it, that sort of approach. So we'll see. We will see how it goes. Now, when this has come up in the Parliament before, there's generally been an idea floated, or a theory floated, that the reason why some politicians, parties, are unwilling to take this forward is that they themselves abuse prostitutes, and if they basically they've been held to ransom. They've been blackmailed, basically. If you bring this law forward, if you vote for this law, then we're going to reveal what's gone on with you or what's gone on within your party, etc. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But it's raised its head already in this debate. The reports in the media that basically prostitutes are implying that if buying sex is criminalised, they will reveal which members of the Scottish Parliament have been their clients. Are they bluffing or not? Who knows? I expect there is an amount of bluff in it, but I suspect there might be a kernel of truth in it as well. Right, before going into the proposed law, let me just clarify the law at the moment. In Scotland and the UK, prostitution is not illegal. Buying and selling sex is not illegal. However, running a brothel is illegal. In other words, a premises for that purpose. Soliciting on the streets, so touting for business as a prostitute on the street, is illegal. And advertising prostitute services, that's a bit of a grey area. I think if it's like tucked away on the internet where you can only find it if you look for it, that's maybe okay. Putting an ad in a phone box or in a newspaper or whatever, that's not okay. So the advertising seems to be tolerated. Now, up until a few years ago, brothels were tolerated in Edinburgh. Edinburgh City Council decided it would basically decide that the law didn't apply in Edinburgh. And so the police, Lothian and Borders Police, they turned a blind eye. But when Police Scotland was introduced, a uniform approach across Scotland was implemented. And that approach, controversially to some, was that the police would actually operate in line with the law, which was a good thing. Having said that, I think it does seem like some brothels still operate in Edinburgh. It seems that way. It's obviously difficult to tell, but it seems that way, that there are still brothels operating. Now, with this current proposal, the BBC's made its position clear from the beginning. The BBC's against it, as you would expect, because the Greens are, the Lib Dems are, so you'd expect the BBC would be as well. Now, obviously, over the course of the debate, they'll give some space to each side, but you can see which side they're prioritising right from day one. It's an interesting issue, the criminalisation of buying sex, because it's provoked yet another civil war within feminism. So there are two feminist positions. Feminist position number one is that women should be free to do whatever they want. Or you might even hear it, women are free to do what they like with their bodies. You heard that one before? So feminists on this side would say these women should have rights. Sex workers should have rights. Complete decriminalisation. They should be able to be unionised. They should get a pension, regular health checks on the NHS. They should be able to check their clients, check their ID through a formal system, operate in a supervised environment, in other words, legalised brothels. And their idea is they wouldn't say necessarily that prostitution is particularly healthy, it's not a great thing, but they want to reduce the harm. Now, I'm going to talk about this later. To what degree can the harms associated with prostitution be reduced? But regardless of that, the thing with harm reduction techniques is basically the approach is intended to make a certain activity less harmful for the individuals engaging in it. But the wider issue is you remove deterrence and then more people engage in it. So often overall the amount of harm increases in society. Now again, feminists on this side would say, if we criminalise the buying of sex, some of these women, these prostitutes, they're going to lose their livelihoods. Well, yes, it's like if you make drug dealing illegal, drug dealers are out of a job. I mean, that's part of the package. Some people say if you criminalise the buying of sex, the prostitutes will just be left with their bad clients, just with the criminal clients. Well, I think we need to clarify the idea of a law is if something's illegal, the idea is that it doesn't happen anymore. It's not really a good argument to say it's illegal, we're going to do it in any case, but that's not going to be as good. Now it's illegal. So obviously, that's not a valid argument. You'll hear the sort of arguments from this side. It's going to happen in any case. Prostitution's always happened, always will, so no point making it illegal. I mean, terrible argument. Murder's always happened, it always will, so what's the point making it illegal? Well, the point is it reduces the incidence of it. And also from the feminists on this side, from the Green Party, Lib Dems, you get sort of the idea that sex work is just like any other work. It's just another form of employment. I say, really? So you're going to have a prostitution stall at the school careers fair? Are we? So if a landlord says to an 18-year-old girl, okay, you can stay in my house, you can have a room, you have the accommodation you need because you're homeless at the moment, but you just have to have sex with me twice a week. Would that be okay? Just like any other work? So you can advertise a job, say for a PA. So a businessman might say he wants a PA to look after travel affairs and do some administration and have sex a couple of times a week. Is that okay? Just like any other work? No one really thinks it is. I mean, how about if someone is unemployed and there's a job at the local brothel? Should the government say, well, there's a job there, you're going to take it, Miss So-and-so? If you're not going to take that job, then you lose your benefits. No one really thinks that sex work is like any other sort of work. And the fact is that some women do want to be prostitutes. Now, people on this side, they say, it's a free choice. It's what some women want to do. And they're right. It is what some women want to do. So we'll come on to that later on. So that's one side. The feminist civil war. Women should be free to do what they want. So if they want to be prostitutes, they should be protected and facilitated in living the life that they want to. Okay, the other side of the feminist civil war, number 2, is that women are being abused by men through prostitution. It's a form of violence against women and girls. We've got to protect women from men. So it's looking at the whole issue, as ever, through a gender lens. What are the men doing? What are the women doing? The men are the baddies, women are the victims, and we've got to understand everything from that point of view. Violence against women and girls. This is trotted out again and again. Prostitution is a form of violence. Well, it just isn't. So if a female university student says, right, the way I want to finance my studies is to have sex with a wealthy gentleman, gentleman used in the loosest sense of the word, every now and again, and he will give me a substantial sum of money, that's how I'll finance my studies. No one should claim that this is violence against women and girls. This is just nonsense. But from the feminist perspective, it's got to be female victims and male abusers. And that's often the case, maybe even the majority of cases. Prostitution does have some of the characteristics of female victims and male abusers. But it's not always that way. If you imagine a man being seduced by a prostitute, let's say it's in a hotel bar or whatever, so the prostitute basically seduces him, and the man doesn't even know she's a prostitute. And then further down the line, when he is, well, quite embroiled in the situation, let's put it that way, he finds out that he's actually expected to pay. Right? Can anyone seriously claim that that man is abusing the woman and the woman is a victim in that transaction? And it's quite difficult to sustain that. Right, the feminists on this side, what else do they say? They say that women's bodies are being bought and sold. Well, they're not. I mean, if you buy or sell something, if you sell something and you don't have it anymore, someone else has it. So the language is excessive. So it's not true. Right, objectification, they say, women are treated just as a sexual object. And again, you need to say more than that. Okay, it is a problem, but you need to be able to explain why. If women are just reduced to a sexual object, but isn't that usually what happens when you pay someone to do something? If you pay someone to cut your lawn, you can say, oh, you're reducing that person to just being a lawnmower. You're not interested in the whole person. All you're cared about, all you're paying for is to get them to come and mow your lawn. That's normally what happens within services. So objectification, yes, it's a real problem, but you need to be able to explain why it's a problem in this particular case, which I will do later. They also put forward argues like, imagine being a prostitute, how repulsive to have sex with just random men, whoever happens to pay. What a terrible job, how demeaning, how awful that must be. Well, I think a lot of jobs are repulsive. A lot of people look at jobs other people do and think, I would never do that. But generally the way the market operates is if a job's quite repulsive, people generally don't want to do it, then the pay goes up for it. So yes, prostitution would seem repulsive to engage in that, particularly to women, but it's not an argument in itself. We need to explain what it is about prostitution being repulsive in particular that gives the arguments against it a more solid ground. Now again, these feminists also point to the emotional, physical harm done to prostitutes, which are mainly women, not exclusively. I'll come to that later. Right, now what do I think about the emotional and physical harms that prostitutes experience? Well, they are very definitely real, and they are very, very severe. And I believe from the state's point of view, it's possible to look at some harms and say we're not going to let people harm themselves in these ways. Partly from a paternalistic point of view, we're going to protect people from making terrible choices that are going to really damage their lives. That's why drugs are illegal. Some drugs are illegal. So it's partly paternalistic to protect people from their own bad decisions, and also to protect the state from the massive cost it's going to impose on the state. So if people take steps that are going to turn their lives to be chaotic and dysfunctional, all sorts of health and emotional problems, that's likely to impose a cost on the state as well. And it's reasonable for the state to say, we're not willing to shoulder this cost, so we're not willing to allow people to make this decision. But the other harms associated with prostitution, they're generally more extreme versions of the harms associated with promiscuity, sexual promiscuity in general. Right, another argument for criminalising the buying of sex, they say prostitutes experience violence and abuse. Well, I'd say that's sort of inevitable with this sort of trade, but okay, yeah, good argument. I mean, women in particular are very vulnerable in these situations with stronger men. So yes, good point. Another argument people on this side bring up is coercion. There's always going to be coercion in the prostitution business, in the industry, and that is absolutely right. And the reason for that is it's a supply-demand thing. There is significant demand, particularly among men, not exclusively, but particularly among men, for women to buy sex from. And there are very few women who are willing to do it because they're repulsed by the idea. So how does the market respond to that? Well, the way a market responds is the price goes up. Okay, but then you end up with a lot of less wealthy men who would be willing to pay for sex but can't afford particularly high rates. So that's therefore an opportunity for criminal gangs. If criminal gangs can one way or another get women to agree for sex for lower rates of pay, then there's a market there ready to be exploited and there's money to be made. And when there's a market ready to be exploited by criminals, then they will come in and do that. So there's always going to be a market force towards coercing women into prostitution. That's the way it is, and that's the way it always will be where prostitution takes place. Now, women who end up as prostitutes, people on this side will say that often it's through, they've been abused in earlier life, they're experiencing poverty, they're vulnerable in other ways, and they're exploited. That is absolutely true. In many cases, to varying degrees, not in all cases by a long way, but it's a very serious issue that's worthy of consideration. Now, there are degrees of coercion. At the extreme end, there's the trafficking side where a woman is lured to Scotland, for example, and enters into some sort of financial contract that you can't get out of, and the only way to presents herself going bankrupt or whatever, or facing criminal action like violence, is to work as a prostitute. So that is absolute black and white coercion. Then the other situations where the woman might be, say, a drug addict, and the drug supplier will say, I'll give you the drug in exchange for, look, you can't afford this, but if you work as a prostitute, then we can keep this going. So again, that's a pretty high degree of coercion and very concerning. So that's the two sides of the discussion here. So the first side is saying women should be free to do what they want with their bodies. The second side is saying women are being abused by men in prostitution. We need to protect women from these bad men who are abusing them. Right, which side am I on? Which side is the Scottish Family Party on? Well, more on the side of number two. More on the side of number two. There's not more to it, but basically they've got more going for them than the other side. But coming to this issue with the battle of the sexes mentality, this is about men and women. Men are bad, women are good. Coming with that lens distorts the picture, and it's not at all helpful. I mean, for a start, not all prostitutes are women. A lot of prostitutes, a very significant percentage, are male. Not all customers of prostitutes are men either. Now, a huge majority are, but not absolutely all. So if you approach this issue from the point of view it's all men's fault and women are the victims, well, you're going to miss the real problem. And I think that's what's happening in this debate in Scotland. So what's at the heart of it, the issue? What is wrong with prostitution? And I think to understand that, we've got to go back to basics and think about what sex is, what it's for, basically our philosophy of sexual relationships. Now, it's commonly believed in our society that sex is or can be just a leisure activity requiring two people. That's a pretty widespread belief. That's something people choose to enter into just for fun, and that can be, obviously it can be more than that, but on some occasions it is okay for it to just be a leisure activity requiring two people to engage in. And the illustration I've used from time to time is like a game of tennis. You can't really play tennis on your own, you need someone else, so it's a leisure activity requiring two people. So if you want to play tennis, you've got to find someone else to play with you, and if you want to engage in sexual activity, you've got to find someone else who's willing to engage in that. Now, if you believe sex can just be a leisure activity that happens to need two people, then rape seems like equivalent to just forcing someone into playing tennis with you, which doesn't seem that serious a crime, but obviously rape is a really serious crime. So sex mustn't be just a leisure activity that happens to need two people. And again, on that basis, what does prostitution amount to? Prostitution would be equivalent to paying someone to play tennis with you. You fancy a game of tennis, there's no one around, so you pay someone to come and play tennis. That doesn't sound too sinister, does it? But we all know it's not really like that. Pornography on this sort of view becomes just like watching tennis on television. But we know that those analogies are not right. They don't capture something unique and special about sex. So sex is not just a leisure activity requiring two people. It's much more than that. It's emotionally intense. Its primary end ultimately is procreation. And the emotional effect of it, psychological effect, is a very deep bonding effect. So a bond is created between the two people who engage in sexual activity, a very strong connection. And when that connection is broken, even if it's only after like one encounter, then damage is done and hurt is imposed on each of the people. Now, the intention of sex is that it forms family. So it brings two things together. It brings together the man and the woman in a closely bonded relationship. So they're committed to each other, they love each other, they're going to stay together, and it brings children into the world. And those things are obviously designed to go together. So the children then can be brought up by their loving parents who stick together through the children's upbringing. That's the ideal. That's what sex is all about. And it works. In that context, it works fantastically. So from a moral stance, if you look around the world, what moral principles do people apply to sexual relationships that they don't apply to tennis, for example? First of all, that the sexual relationships should be committed. Not a casual thing with someone that you're committed to in the long term. This avoids the hurt of instability, of broken relationships, and it also results in parents sticking together to bring up their own children. So it should be committed, should be exclusive. In other words, not just with one person, then another, whatever, or you're committed to one person, but you also have sex with another person. It should be exclusive between two people. Again, fulfilling the ideal, you want mum and dad in a close relationship, bringing up their own children, not feeling jealous of other partners. You don't end up with one child shared between these families, and you just end up with sort of muddle. That's not ideal. And the morality surrounding sexual relationships is intended to avoid these situations. So sexual relationships should be committed, it should be exclusive, should be mutual. In other words, both parties want to enter into it for its own sake, to strengthen the relationship. Otherwise, it's going to undermine the relationship. So committed, exclusive, mutual, and the last one, individuated, which is a bit of an odd word, but it means related to an individual. So it's not right in in terms of sexuality, sexual relationship, it's not right to say, I felt like having sex, Samantha was there, so she would do, so I had sex with Samantha. People around the world will say, that's not right. That's not the way it really should be. It should be within a relationship and attraction to a particular person, to the totality of that person, not just their sexual side. So committed, exclusive, mutual, and individuated. They're important moral principles. They're backed up by my reason, revelation, and intuition, the three things that tell me what's right and wrong. And marriage, the institution of marriage, combines these four factors in an institution that creates the ideal context for sexual relationships. And the further you go away from the ideal of man and woman married as the context for sex, the further you go away from that, the more problems ensue. Right, let's look at prostitution. Now we've laid out our standards. Right, committed. Is it within a committed relationship? Well, absolutely, totally the opposite. Is it within an exclusive relationship? The two people only in a sexual relationship, only having sex with each other? Well, absolutely not. Is it mutual? Both parties want to have sex? No. One does and the other wants to get money. So it's not mutual. Is it individuated? Is it an attraction to the whole individual person? Or is it just attraction to sex? Well, obviously, it's not individuated. So in terms of the moral standards for sexual relationships, prostitution is about as bad as you can get. It's about as far from the ideal as you could get, with the possible exception of rape. It's at the other end of the spectrum. So prostitution does harm women. As I say, if you break these moral principles, flout them so in such a brazen manner, the consequences are going to be pretty deleterious, and they are. So the consequences for women are very serious: physical, psychological, emotional, and relational harm. By relational harm, I mean the ability to form healthy sexual relationships outside of their work. And I want to, as the Scottish Family Party, we want to protect women from this harm. And I think that people, Ash Regan wants to protect women, well, prostitutes in general, from this harm. So that's good. We are right with them on that. Now, but what about the clients, who are mainly, but not exclusively, men, right? But it also harms them. Now, a man might end up using a prostitute. I don't know, he might be stressed or drunk or just lacking moral principle, whatever. But he takes that step, and what's the consequence for him? The prostitute gets her money, so she's quite pleased with that side of the deal. He gets to have sex, so he's happy with that side of the deal. But the prostitute is seriously harmed. The man is seriously harmed as well. He'll often be plagued by feelings of guilt, might end up addicted to sex. This is a common thing, addicted to prostitutes. That can cause all sorts of wider problems in life. Similarly, relational dysfunction, inability to maintain a healthy relationship with a partner or a wife. Family breakdown. Obviously, if a wife, for example, or a partner finds out that a man's been using prostitutes, this doesn't exactly go down well, can result in family breakdown. And another very important factor is the effect of, same with pornography and of using prostitutes, is that a man's aversion to sexual crime is eroded. So a man tends to think sexual crimes are less serious and becomes more likely to engage in them. So that's very bad for the man, because that can end up wrecking his life, can end up in prison, and obviously it's very bad for women as well. Now, those harms that affect men, I'm bothered about those. I want to protect men from those harms. Now, I think from the feminist angle, that they don't care about what happens. They wouldn't even begin to mention that. I mean, men are the baddies. Men are causing the problem here. So if men's lives are being messed up, ruined by this, they're not bothered about that. It doesn't enter into the equation, but for us it does, because we care about everyone equally. Right, the Scottish Family Party, clues in the name. We're also concerned about the harm that prostitution does to families, because a prostitute is, a woman is basically a serial adulterer. And that's going to break up families, that's going to cause huge hurt and harm, poverty, etc. for wives, partners, for children, broken homes, and it's ultimately going to cause a lot of expense to the state as well, picking up the pieces. Now, in that way, a prostitute is a bit like a drug dealer. They're enticing someone into buying something that is going to be seriously harmful towards them. And if you completely decriminalise prostitution, you expand the market and more people are going to be harmed by this factor. Another really important thing to think about with prostitution is its effect on the ethos and values of the nation. If prostitution was seen like any other form of work, then you're growing up, let's say you're 13 years old, and you pick up that in your society, people think it's fine to pay for sex. That's absolutely fine. That's what adults do, no problem. So when you're 13, I assume you could pay for sex. So a couple of 13-year-olds, because the law turns a blind eye to 13-year-olds having sex with each other in Scotland. So if one says to the other, look, I've got 50 quid, got 50 quid for my birthday, how about I give it to you and we have sex somewhere? I hope you, like me, are thinking, well, that's horrible, that's just totally wrong, that we do not want that happening at all. But if you have a society that endorses and communicates to the population that prostitution, paying for sex, is just fine, it's just something that people do sometimes, then why shouldn't those 13-year-olds do that? So it's corrosive of the values of the nation. When people talk about tolerance zones, I don't hear that so much anymore, but it's been talked about in the past in Scotland. I always said, if the MSPs want a tolerance zone, how about the forecourt of the Scottish Parliament, so everyone can see exactly what's happening and what it's doing to the values of the nation. Now, the issue of coercion, it's a very serious issue that we do not want to minimise in any way, shape or form. We want the police to be investigating and dealing with this. Anyone who has been coerced into prostitution, they need to know that there's a place they can go to, there's a phone number they can call, and the moment they've done that, they will be totally protected from any consequences, that they'll be removed from any danger and enabled to start a new life. That's really vital. I think the people proposing the bill would want that as well, and that is absolutely what we would want as well. Now, in the bill, they call it a right to support. So if a woman or a man has been working as a prostitute, if they want to come out of it, they have a right to get certain degrees of support. Now, I completely agree with the sentiment. These services should be offered. Whether or not it should be put into law, I'm really not sure. I think what tends to happen in the Scottish Parliament is if something needs doing, they'll pass a law about it. But if you want to provide really good support services to women leaving prostitution, then just go ahead and do it. The challenge is the money. If you want to commit the money to it, then set up the service. But what they do instead is they pass the law and then worry about where's the money coming from? How are we going to manage this? How's it going to work? So what we might end up with if this law passes is a woman will work as a prostitute. Then she'll say, right, I actually want to leave this now. I want to do something else. And then she will be in a position potentially to sue the government because they haven't provided the right support for her. Is that really what we want? Is that really the way we want this to operate? I would suggest not. So we do want this support to be in place, but don't pass a law giving people a right to it. I really don't think that's the best way to go about it. Anyway, I won't talk about that any further. So then the law enforcement route should be for a first offence, then for a prostitute, then it's a scheme to enable the person to leave prostitution and to be supported, protected, whatever's necessary. If the person doesn't want to engage with that and instead continues in prostitution, then it becomes a matter of criminal justice and there would be prosecution, that there would be punishment. I would suggest maybe even a similar approach for clients as well, that on a first occasion they could be educated, and if they commit to refraining in the future, then okay. But if it's a repeat pattern, then criminal justice should apply punishments. So our policy, we would criminalise the buying and selling of sex, because that's fair, and that would have the maximum effect in reducing the incidence of prostitution and thereby protecting prostitutes and their clients, potential prostitutes, potential clients, from the harm that they would suffer. Now this bill, there's another aspect to it that's very important that we need to understand. It also repeals existing laws, for example, against soliciting. So it would make it legal for a prostitute to stand in the street, dressed however she liked, attempting to seduce passers-by in order to take money from them for sexual services. Okay? So she could invite them, encourage them, explain the deal, this is how much it costs. But then if, for example, if the man said, okay, I'll accept that deal, I'll sign that contract, metaphorically, then he would be the criminal and she would have done nothing wrong. I think this is just bizarre. I mean, it's mad. It's mad. The law makes it clear that a prostitute can't be an accomplice or an accessory to a man committing the crime of paying for sex. So the woman can lure, invite, encourage the man to pay for sex, but if he does, he's committed a crime and she hasn't. In other words, it will be legal to sell something that is illegal to buy. So the prostitute can financially benefit from getting someone else to commit a crime, but they're not committing a crime themselves. I mean, it's just bizarre, isn't it? But the problem, the reason we've ended up with this completely illogical situation, is it's approaching it with a feminist lens. Women are good, men are bad. So what should the law do? The law should prosecute men and not women, because that's obviously fair from this sort of feminist viewpoint. So you can imagine the situation where you've got a prostitute, say, in the street, dressed provocatively, alluringly, and she gets men into conversation, basically explains the deal. You know, would you like to come to such and such a location? This is how much it's going to cost. We'll have sex. So she's luring him in. And if the man says, yeah, okay, I'll do that, then the police jump out from behind the bush, arrest the man, and he's charged and might be sent to prison. Whereas the woman could stand there and then just try and lure in the next man. I mean, it's ridiculous. Utterly ridiculous. Also, this law, if it passes, how are they going to catch the men paying for sex? So are they going to end up in court? Who will be the witness? You'll assume the witness has got to be the prostitute. So we'll have cases where the prostitute will say, yes, this is what happened. I said to him, do you want to pay for sex? Come up to my room. This is how much it cost. And he said yes. Thank you very much, witness. Yeah, we'll now convict this man on the basis of this evidence. I mean, how unfair can it get? Now, if you want to suppress prostitution, one of the easiest ways is to stop the adverts, stop the online adverts. But they're not going to do that. Similarly, you could have, maybe they'll try and have sting operations, but they need to be careful of that it doesn't go over into entrapment. But another thing with the law as well is it's illegal to pay for sex even if the payment was not required or discussed before the sex. So in other words, man meets woman, they have sex, and then the man gives the woman some money afterwards. That would be illegal. I guess the idea is that maybe the implication of that money could be, well, let's do it again. So in other words, it would be like a one behind system. So a woman's working as a prostitute. She didn't demand money before, but she gets paid after, and then the assumption becomes that she gets paid after every time. So it's sort of prostitution, and the woman knows full well that this is just a way of getting around the law, but it wouldn't get around the law. The man would still be prosecuted, and the woman would be fine. She could just keep taking the money, and she would not be breaking the law. Now, another thing in this law is that it basically pardons previous offenders, women, of prostitution offences, which I just think is a nonsense. I mean, these people broke the law in the past. The purpose of pardoning them, I mean, it's just nonsense. I won't go into that any further. But what we've got here basically is an approach to a serious issue founded on feminism. Men are bad, women are good. And that obviously results in a flawed result. We've had other issues in Scotland. They've been approached from this issue. It's about women and men rather than what's right and what's true. I think the gender recognition reform debate was influenced by that to some degree. There was a proposed misogyny law under which men can commit hate crimes against women, but women can't commit hate crimes against men. And then the same flawed approach has been brought to prostitution. Now, our line, prostitution is an evil. It corrupts society and it's damaging for all involved. It hurts people. It hurts prostitutes, it hurts their clients, hurts their families, has a corrosive effect on family life, undermines the ethos of sexual relationships in a society, and costs the government a lot of money. So basically, people buying sex or selling sex, they're externalizing their costs to wider society because they're not paying the price of the wider damage that this interaction does. So the idea of harm reduction, we can manage the harm caused by prostitution. Well, no, because the fundamental damage done is inherent in the practice of prostitution. It's not some sort of collateral damage. It's inherent in the act. So attempts to reduce the harm ultimately are going to be largely unsuccessful. Now, this law that's been proposed by Regan, some Christian organisations have given it their nod. They've expressed approval of it, which is fine. Okay, but I hope they've been more nuanced than that as well. I haven't looked at their statements. For example, this law allows women prostitutes to solicit on the street, which they're currently not allowed to do. So Christian organisations, etc., are you happy that this has now been allowed? I assume that they're not. And I would hope the Christian organisations as well, commenting on this, they'll approach it from the issue of right and wrong rather than women are right and men are wrong. And I'm sure that they will. So if I was in the Parliament, would I vote for this bill as it stands? Well, first of all, I'd try and amend it. I'd try and keep the current restrictions on soliciting, for example. Would I vote for it in any case? Yes, I would. It would be an improvement. This law will be an improvement on the current situation, but it's far, far from ideal. And if you want just a moral law, then we need to get the Scottish Family Party into the Scottish Parliament, and then we could bring that forward. So do support us, like and subscribe, and do join us via the link below. Thanks for watching.